John Donne wrote Meditation 17 while he was sick. He had begun to heal. He wasn't quite dead yet. Nonetheless, his illness and imminent death was probably on his mind. And when John Donne was preaching, church bells would ring for a lot of different reasons in England. But one of them would have been to ring out of prayer, a call prayer for somebody, or for somebody's funeral bells. Meaning that it would be time for the funeral and the church bells would ring, and you might look at your coworker and say, well, who died? For whom do those bells toll? Now, if you're a fan of Hemingway or Hetfield, then perhaps you recognize that question, for whom the bell tolls. So John Donne, Meditation 17, Nunc lento sonitu dicunt merierus. Now this bell tolling softly for another says to me, thou must die. Perchance he for whom this bell tolls may be so ill, as he knows not it tolls for him. And perchance I may think myself so much better than I am, as they that who are about me and see my state may have caused it to toll for me, and I know not that. The Church is Catholic, universal. So are all her actions. All that she does belongs to all. When she baptizes a child, that action concerns me. For that child is thereby connected to that head which is my head too, and engrafted into the body whereof I am a member. Now guys, that's a reference to St. Paul's description of Christ as the head of the church, and the church as the body of Christ. And Donne is making this argument that every child that is baptized is now a part of him as well. I think it's really interesting that the Catholic Church, and not just the Catholic Church, but it's chosen from Romans chapter 6, know you not that you who are baptized into Christ are baptized into his death? Therefore, if you have died with him, will you also rise with him? I had the honor of giving that reading at my grandfather's funeral. And just 4 years later, my sister gave the same reading at my first son's baptism. Now, watch as he gives us several images to emphasize the unity of humanity. When the church buries a man, that action concerns me. All mankind is of one author and one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. God employs several translators. Some pieces are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice, but God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves. Again, for that library where every book shall lie open to one another. Now, let's reflect on this for just a moment. The word translated, what do you normally think it means? From one language to another, right? And that's how he employs it. He says, we're all part of one book. And when a man dies, it's not like the chapter's torn out and tossed to the wind. Rather, it's translated into a better language. But if you've got your Norton, if you're using your Norton, or maybe some other site online, then you can see that translated literally means to move something, to shift location, right? He's using both meanings here. Yes, we're being translated into a better language, but we're also being translated from earth to heaven. It's pretty cool. And he uses the word leaves to mean pages, right? God's hand is in every translation. His hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves again, for that library where every book shall lie open to one another. Now that's heaven, where we see completely into each other. Leaves, again, here meaning pages, but also calling to mind that a man is leaving earth for heaven. And if you're like me, maybe you even thought of leaves of the trees as well. They're all gone now. They'd be on the ground underneath the snow. But what if God were to bind them back up again? As therefore, the bell that rings a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation it comes. So this bell calls us all. But how much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness? Now again, remember, John Donne is sick. And he's trying to get an idea. He hasn't gotten there yet for us, but he's establishing the idea of unity. Okay, he's saying, here I am, I'm sick. I could die tomorrow for all I know. It doesn't really matter whose bells those are. They're for me. They're reminding me. What are they reminding me of? They're reminding me of my need to be in right relationship to God. He says there was a contention as far as a lawsuit in which piety and dignity, religion and estimation were mingled. Which of the religious orders should ring to prayers first in the morning? We're talking about different kinds of monks or nuns, brothers or sisters, and they're arguing over who should have the honor and dignity of getting everybody else up for prayer. Now, if you like to sleep in, then you're probably thinking, well, the place of honor and dignity is the one where you don't have to do anything. You can sleep in and let everyone else do the work, right? Well, that's a backwards form or backwards understanding of leadership. Leadership is just that. It's forging ahead, not following from behind, not resting. It's serving. So, how do they figure out who should have that honorable position? Pretty commonsensical, if you ask me. It was determined that they should ring first that rose earliest. Who wants it more? If we understand aright the dignity of this bell that tolls for our evening prayer, we would be glad to make it ours by rising early. In that application, that it might be ours as well as his, whose indeed it is. Now, this can be evening prayer even if it's the middle of the day, because it's your prayer for the end of your life, the evening of your life, if you will. He says, the bell doth toll for him that thinks it doth, and though it intermit again, yet from that minute that occasion wrought upon him, he is united to God. Once you hear the bell and you connect it, he says, to God, then it's there. Even when it stops, it rings up again later. He says, who casts not up his eye to the sun when it rises? But who takes off his eye from a comet when that breaks out? Who bends not his ear to any bell which upon any occasion rings? But who can remove it from that bell which is passing a piece of himself out of the world? No man is an island, entire unto itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were. That's a peak. As well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I'm involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. These are among the most famous lines from Meditation 17. No man is an island, entire unto himself, and seek not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Neither can we call this begging of misery, or a borrowing of misery, as though we were not miserable enough of ourselves, but must fetch in more from the next house, and taking upon us the misery of our neighbors. Truly it were an excusable covetousness if we did, for affliction is a treasure, and scarce any man hath enough of it. No man hath affliction enough that is not matured and ripened by it, and made fit for God by that affliction. Now, you might ask yourself, wait a minute, I can't have too much suffering? Well, if you have the same worldview that John Donne has, that life is about more than what we experience on earth, then maybe you can't. What he's going to say in this final section is that suffering in and of itself has no value. But if you use it, if it becomes a motivating force for your relationship with God, then, or simply to be better, to live life more fully, then suffering had a purpose, and you applied it. And he also says that you might notice suffering in someone else. You might notice someone else's affliction. You might think, that could just as easily be I, and one day soon it could be. And so even though you yourself are not suffering, you're motivated. You're motivated to press ahead, to be better, to make the most of your time. And here's how he says it. If a man carry treasure in bullion or in a wedge of gold, and have none coined into current money, his treasure will not defray him as he travels. Tribulation is treasure in the nature of it, but it is not current money in the use of it, except we get nearer and near our home, heaven, by it. In other words, you're not going to get anywhere with a block of gold. That's the affliction. You've got to exchange it into currency. That's making application of the suffering to become closer to God. Another man may be sick too, and sick to death, and this affliction may lie in his bowels as gold in a mine, and be of no use to him. But this bell that tells me of his affliction digs out and applies that gold to me, if by this consideration of another's danger I take mine own into contemplation, and so secure myself by making my recourse to my God, who is our only security. It's a good piece. It's a piece I think about quite a bit, actually. Every man's death diminishes me because I am a part of mankind. None of us is an island. We are all part of the continent. And to lose anyone is to become less. Stay warm.